Hey, I'm Jade, and today I want to talk to you about why we doubt everything in OCD and a couple of things that you can try to stop doubting everything. Bit of a disclaimer though, unfortunately, in my experience, what we need to do in order to stop doubting things is to care a little bit less about the feared outcomes that we have. So a bit of background about me before I jump into this. I am pretty much recovered from OCD. So OCD plays a very minimal role in my life. I don't really notice I have it most of the time. So I've done a lot of work to get better through exposures and conditional self and life acceptance. And I had a really rough ride with OCD, say 17 years, suffering really badly. And so the reason I thought I'd cover this topic today is that I actually noticed that one of the things that hangs around for a while is this doubting kind of thing in our mind. I'm going to open a window because I'm absolutely boiling. So warm in here today. Okay, so one of the things that gets to us is doubting. So when you suffer really badly with OCD, your biggest fears are all jacked up, all terrifying, and you doubt whether they're true, what your identity is, whether you're going to get sick. You doubt everything. Now, when you start to get better from the big themes, something I noticed as I started to get better is that smaller things that didn't necessarily bother me as much before started to come forward. So I was going to use a few of the examples of things that came forward for me once my big fears had gone away or reduced significantly, just to illustrate how letting go of, not necessarily caring, but letting go of needing certainty that something bad isn't going to happen helped me, so that then hopefully we can build it back up to the bigger things and you can see how it would apply. So one of the things that I have doubted and actually still get to me from time to time, because I think it's worth mentioning that recovery doesn't mean cure. So I still have a brain that has the mechanism that OCD is, I guess. It's just that it doesn't have much to cling to anymore. And so what happens for me is that I notice small areas where my OCD will try to latch. And that's usually areas of uncertainty. So one of the things that happened to me a while ago was I made a new friend and I found myself being really scared about that friendship. Just everything that she said, I would think, does that mean she's super, has strong views in this area politically? Or does that mean that she would disagree with me on my views on this other thing? Or, oh my gosh, does she not like drinking? And therefore, if I like drinking, we're incompatible, kind of like an ROCD type thing. Now, the reason that didn't last very long and didn't latch very hard is all of the groundwork I had done around doubt and uncertainty. And so the reason we doubt things, from my experience, I'm just a person who's getting better from OCD and has gotten better from OCD. From my experience, when I'm scared of the outcome of something, that's when I have doubts about it. I don't really obsess or wonder about things that I'm not scared of or pay little or no attention to. So if you think about a scenario that you don't care about the outcome, you're not going to be like, oh, I'm really doubting as to whether I'm going to see my close friend in the next 3 weeks or not, because you might and you might not, but you don't particularly mind either way. So you don't have your doubts about it. You just don't really know. You don't really mind. So what I had learned to apply, and I'll use this example with the friend, is I was really thinking about it a lot and I was really worried about whether I should continue being friends with them. And this is a while ago. I'm just, zooming in on everything she said and did and thinking, oh, is this going to be a repeat of a friendship I had in the past where it didn't go so well? Surely I want to get out now. It was very much the ROCD feelings. What I realized was that I was scared of ending up in a similar scenario I'd ended up in before. And so then it was kind of like, well, why is that so scary? Maybe I will end up in a situation with this friend where we're not a great fit for a friendship. The friendship runs its course, or maybe she says, hey, I don't like you. And can I live with that situation? Absolutely. There's no problem there. But because what our brains do is make things bigger and more scary than they actually are, we tend to place way more importance on preventing them from happening, hence obsessing about whether or not the friendship is a good idea to pursue. Similarly, I've had someone in my family going through difficulties at work at the moment with a fellow colleague they work with. they're just like, oh, how do I, I can't work like this anymore. This is the worst thing in the world. They're going to push me to insanity, and et cetera, and it's like, what is the situation that you're scared of? You're scared of being burnt out from work. You're scared of having to leave your job. And it's like, that's really inconvenient and really not nice and really not what we want. But when I spoke to them about the fact that, let's just assume you are going to have to end up leaving your job as a result of this co-worker. Let's just assume that's going to happen. Like, what would you do? That, there's going to be lots of opportunities for new jobs. Maybe you'll just not get another job and you'll be devastated, and then you'll be depressed for 3 years. It's like, this is not about reassuring yourself that everything's going to be okay. It's about the reality that lots of things happen in life, in an uncertain world, in an uncertain life. And in OCD, the reason we doubt everything is that we want everything exactly how we want it. We don't want any grey areas. We don't want anything left unknown, unsure. And it's like, the antidote to uncertainty, isn't it? Is like, getting used to uncertainty is one thing. Oh, okay, I can live with uncertainty. But if you're terrified of one of the options that uncertainty presents to you, like, what do you do then? And that was the situation I found myself in with my OCD. It was like, well, okay, I can go with uncertainty, but how do you become comfortable with the fact that you're absolutely terrified of one of them happening? And I just found that I wasn't able to exit that loop of, okay, I know it's uncertain as to whether it's going to happen or not, but even if there's 0.00001% chance, I'm not going to stop obsessing about this situation. And I think that's what it comes down to. And again, like, I can ramp this up now. So one of the other fears I had, which is, for me, was more scary than just losing a friend. I know that losing a friend's a big thing, but in the grand scheme of fears with OCD, it's kind of like, you made peace with losing a friend, who cares? So I was really scared about getting food poisoning, getting really sick, and I would always overcook chicken, like, ridiculously. And not long ago, I was in a situation where I was at someone's house and they were preparing food, and they definitely were not following like best practice on food contamination. So as someone who, like, I feel like I don't suffer with OCD anymore, I do sometimes notice a rising opportunity for OCD to jump in. So I felt like in the background a little bit of like, what are they doing and what if I get sick? And I'm not anymore that scared of this idea of getting sick. So it unlatched immediately. I didn't have to do anything. It started to rise and it went, because I know that it is not the worst thing that could ever happen in the whole world if I got sick. Whereas before, my thought process was, what if I get sick? That's going to make my anxiety way worse. My OCD is going to go crazy. I'm going to miss work. I'm going to lose earnings. I'm not going to be able to look after my kids properly. Everything's going to be awful. And like, because I did the work to recognize that I definitely don't want that situation, but life has a way of figuring things out. It would happen. If it happened, it would happen. No amount of me concerning myself now is going to make it less likely to happen. And so I, from my experience, think the reason that I doubted things so much was fundamentally down to the fear of, if they came true, it would be awful. And when you boil it down to that, I just feel like that's such a common sense approach to it. And even now, when I speak to people who don't have OCD and they say, well, how did you get better from OCD? I say, I just learned not to be scared of things that OCD was latching to. Oh, right, that makes sense. Yeah, because if you were panicking and freaking out, like, yeah, you used to think that going to a swimming pool was scary. And Jade, that's ridiculous. It's not scary to go to a swimming pool. So it's like, yes, making peace with the fact that OCD is going to latch to different things that we doubt, and it's going to follow us around trying to latch different things. But the work for me was recognizing that nothing that I deem to be that terrible is as terrible in reality as I imagine. And working through that process of just slowly chipping away at my belief system. We do live in a society that really dramatizes bad things. So, for example, red flags. That's a red flag. I hate this type of content on social media. If you've got like friendship red flag, workplace red flags, boyfriend red flags. It's like it leaves no room for the fact that everyone's different and everyone has flaws and everyone has beauty as well. It's like, oh, 3 red flags, you're out. That isn't how life works. And so, whilst in obviously very damaging situations and people who are being mistreated and not recognizing it, yes, of course, it's like, here's 3 things that if a person in your life is doing this, it could be a sign potentially that they're not a great person to have in your life. But with OCD, we have these red flags on everything. It's like red flag, red flag, red flag. And I think that our work is in becoming a little bit more fluid about the concept of life not being perfect, recognizing that there are going to be many ups and downs in our life and making peace with that. We're trying so hard to grasp this. How do I make everything perfect? How do I ensure certainty? How do I make sure that I'm safe? And what we're doing is boxing our world in. And I did it for so long. I boxed myself in further and further and further by just reducing the instances where I might be triggered, or reducing the instances where I might have to do my recovery work when I didn't want to. And all it does is takes away our joy. And that's something I've talked about before, is that as I started to get better from OCD, as I started to move away from the constant back-to-back panic attacks, I started to realize that what it was doing was taking my joy. I was no longer anxious. I was no longer panicked, but I wasn't happy or joyful. And I wasn't going out into the world and feeling present with it and really leaning into it. And I truly, truly believe that the answer to finding a way to not let OCD grip our life is to let go of the need for certainty, not even just accept uncertainty, but actually let go of either outcome being awful or terrible. Now, I get asked a lot of questions about how on earth would this apply to scarier themes, the more taboo themes like harm and POCD. And all I can say is that it's exactly the same. We're still making peace that is not something we would ever want, but it's also acknowledging that there would be no way of ever being certain or knowing that any person in the whole world isn't capable of anything, and recognizing that there are people in the world who do things for various number of reasons, genetics, mental illness, they've ended up the way they are. And so there's this amalgamation of experience and genetics that's led them to commit an awful, very upsetting, very distressing crime, that they will need support and they will need to be in prison perhaps for what they've done. That doesn't take away the fact they're a person with value. They've done something bad and they need to be supported through making amends to that and changing so that no one's harmed in the future. And so our society views people as monsters, as terrible. But when you see people's backstories, you can often make sense of why something happened. When you watch documentaries about criminals, and you're like, oh, whoa, you can see what led them to it, even though you strongly disagree with what they've done. And so I think making peace that many people before have committed terrible crimes, served time, perhaps gotten better, perhaps sought the support they needed and gone on to do good things with their life. Some haven't. Some have stayed in that dangerous zone and have never left prison. And it's not about saying, oh, I could be comfortable if that were my reality. It's just that if you're so terrified of that being you, it's kind of the recognition that, am I really going to spend another 15 years wondering? Or am I going to make peace that, do you know what? Some people in life do those things. And I really wouldn't like to think it's me. But by me turning down the dial of that person's a monster or this or that and the other, just seeing it for what it really is, a person who's committed an act that's really not good and really terrible, and you really wouldn't want to do that, but you're not going to spend your days worrying about it non-stop. And so I get it that with those themes, it's harder to see how it would work, but it really is about having the same reaction that a person without OCD would have to your feared scenario. So if I said to my husband something crazy, like the first thing comes to my mind, because I've got a knife here, if I said to my husband, when you're chopping that vegetable, aren't you scared that you could just easily turn around and hurt someone with that knife? He'd be like, no. And I'd be like, oh, right. But what if you did hurt someone? He's like, why would I hurt someone? You know, he's not really obsessing about it. And then if I said, well, you know, what if you, do you think you could ever hurt, do you think you could ever harm someone? He would genuinely probably say, I'd like to think I wouldn't, but you know what? If someone really, like if someone harmed someone in my family, I could see why I could be pushed to the edge. But yeah, I don't know. He wouldn't think about it again. But someone with harm OCD, that type of question, if the thought that he had, the same as you, was, oh my gosh, I could, if I was pushed, I could, would then lead us to obsess forever. Now, he's not obsessing the same. He's actually just directly said, don't know, maybe, could do. Like, really don't imagine I would and really hope I wouldn't. So it's kind of like the same thing. We're trying to train our brain to have the same emotional response as someone without OCD. And that's how I saw it. And I feel like I'm achieving that now with my biggest fears, is like seeing it the same way as a person without OCD would. I'm certainly not at peace with the idea of any of my old fears being true. I'm not obsessing about them the same, because the fear has reduced around what if I end up in prison one day? Well, if I end up in prison one day, it'd be horrible. I really wouldn't like it, but I could read. And so it's just understanding that in reality, there is nothing to fear in this life. Like, life's uncertain, things are going to happen in your life. Same with getting unwell. Maybe we'll get unwell, maybe we won't, maybe a loved one will, maybe they won't. And until we let go of this illusion that I'll only be happy once I've got certainty on everything, until I know that I'm preventing bad things from happening, then we're never going to be able to let OCD loosen its grip. So I would really recommend, for more detail on that, the chapter 4 of The Myth of Self-Esteem by Albert Ellis. It just explains it loads better. And it's from, like, I guess he's a psychologist. He's the guru of rational emotive behavior therapy. So it lays it out really well with examples of why it's really good to turn down our irrational beliefs in these areas. And so for me, like, the doubts that crop up in life now are just really low level things that my brain just lets go of, like anything. So I don't know, my husband's work situation is changing soon, and my brain could go, what if we end up this, that, and the other? And it's like, well, okay, we'll change life. We will go and live in a caravan on the beach somewhere else. We'll deal with it when it happens. And I think that's another big thing, is like, why do we worry about it in advance of something bad happening? Like, I spent 30 years worrying about something that never happened. And so it's also making peace with, like, A, throw whatever you want at me, life, and B, I'll deal with you when you're here. And I know I'll be able to deal with you because I've dealt with hard things in the past. Same with, like, relationships. If we're, like, worrying, what if my partner cheats, or what if I have a divorce and the whole family shames me? It's like, well, that happens to a lot of people and they get through it. And maybe they're better on the other side. Maybe they're not better on the other side. Because again, it's not about reassurance. So I hope that's been useful with some of the examples. If you have any questions on that topic, or any other topic, or anything you want me to cover, please comment below, and I will see you soon.